Before I do anything, I want to make a disclaimer. The views expressed in this video are my own and not indicative of DoD policy, nor are they endorsed explicitly or implicitly in any way by the DoD, the Air Force, or any governmental agency. They're just me, I'm Carter, my thoughts on the Air Force. First, before I go into the reasons that I'm leaving the Air Force, the reasons I won't stay in, the reason for the video, I'll go over my backstory a little bit, my record of service, and then get into the reasons for the video. So I was born in Virginia, and I stayed there all my life. I enlisted in July of 2017, after graduating high school in May of that year. Joining the Air Force was still, I think, the best decision for me at the time, and I don't regret joining. Through my time in the Air Force, I was able to buy a home, build credit, I'm in like the 760s to 740s, depending on who you ask, build up a nest egg, gain life experience, pay for college, and figure out a general direction for where I want my life to go, a general life purpose. However, I don't want to stay in the Air Force, and I wouldn't encourage anyone else to go in unless they have a severe financial need. I want this video to be primarily concerned with the practices of the Air Force as they're felt on the level of the individual airman, not just me, but theoretically how the structure itself affects airmen in what I perceive to be wholly, overall negative ways that are too much for me to bear for the good parts. I've spent only 5 months of my military career on Air Force bases, the 2 months in basic training at Lackland, 2 months at Goodfellow Air Force Base for part of tech school, and 1 month at Robins Air Force Base for Airman Leadership School. The majority of my time has been spent on Army bases in joint environments, so I realized this could apply more to the military as a whole, and that's why I titled the video Military instead of Air Force. If what I've seen has more to do with problems across all branches of the military, then I think that gives my experiences even more credence and can appeal to even more people. And there are more potential nodes of change across 5-6 branches than there are if just one, the Air Force. I recognize the importance of a strong military and the special role that America's military plays in preventative care, protecting American interests abroad by keeping peace across the globe. In the midst of the current severe recruitment crisis and what I'm seeing now on the inside as a growing retention crisis, especially now that COVID, the pandemic, is over, I want those who are prospective of the military to keep certain things in mind before they go in. This video and the script I'm reading now are largely for myself to work through my feelings at length and put everything to rest as best I can for myself before I begin my new life as a college student and then eventually a nurse. But I also want to make this a public video so that those who are thinking of joining know what they're getting into, as I said before. As a member of Generation Z, I think that I am best situated to use terms, language that my generation is going to understand, best explain and describe to them what they can expect when they join. And as a source that isn't someone doing propaganda or a psyop trying to get them to join by showing the fun parts like those fitness influencers who do the Marine Corps PT test or the Army PT test, or like going aboard a gunship and saying how it's just like a video game when you're killing all these people, or the people who highlight surface level inclusion initiatives. I think I saw a couple videos about a day in the life with women in the Navy, something like that. I don't like that, but this is just more authentic, I think. There are aspects of military life that remain mutable, that remain changeable, and their alteration for the better could increase retention and quality of life for the currently serving airmen. Not only that, but given time, the culture and the climate of the military as a whole could shift for the better with proper alterations, priming us for success in future theaters. If members of my generation and airmen as a whole receive better treatment, they will more willingly passively endorse the Air Force. You won't need to hand out a special medal if you refer a friend, like we're some sort of MLM. And do their own part to generate a more positive public perception of the military as a whole. I believe these changes in culture will allow for retention of various mindsets and personalities, But I'm also of a pessimistic, realistic mindset when it comes to these changes actually happening. I think greater diversity of thought and culture will allow the government to best reach their recruitment goals and to prime themselves in the great power competition with our near-peer adversaries. The Air Force and military as a whole need to realize the cultural values of my generation and to meet people where they are. The days where service members assimilated into military lifestyles, military service, are gone. Rather, today, the military has to assimilate the desires of recruits. I will not have a solution to every problem that I lay out. In some cases, I don't think there are any problems. It's just inherent to the military. I can say, however, that there are aspects of military life that turned me away from future service that could have been changed. And they're continuing to turn away others from their initial enlistment, others from re-upping, from re-enlisting, from going higher in commissioning, and they deserve redress. My career was as follows. I said I enlisted in July of 2017. That's true. July 11th, 7/11 day, was when I entered basic training. I graduated September 11th, 2017. I got like a standing ovation in the airport because our flights were at the time that the trade centers were hit. So it was a really good introduction to military life, seeing how many people still appreciated the military. And that was my first day as an airman out in the world. So that was a cool experience. There's ceremonies like that where you'll feel it. You'll feel that camaraderie. You'll feel that esprit de corps. You'll feel the honor imbued in the ranks in the service. So that's a positive. That was a really high note to enter into. From 11 September 2017 until 9 October 2018, I have my Form 77 here. I'm just going to read it. I completed an 8-week BMT, leading 45 flight members as a beast monitor. Scored 93 on my end of course test, earning the Honor Graduate Award. I was a Hebrew linguist. That was my AFSC. 1 in 3 X, ended as a 7. 1 in 3 7. 1 L shred, yeah, Lima, for Hebrew. I graduated with the 332 from the Defense Language Institute. 4.0 GPA, Dean's List every semester for that, and a bunch of other stuff. I got the Commandant's Award, meaning I also got an Army Achievement Medal. I was a Red Robe for 96 people, Airman Leadership classes, drill classes, stuff like that. Earned our Flight Fitness of the Quarter, Honor Flight of the Quarter Award. I think that's for academic stuff. I donated 300 hours of my personal time. I earned the Volunteer Service Medal Gold level. I was a White Rope, the Deputy White Rope, and the Community Life Rope for my building of about 40 people. I called myself the Pink Rope because I was the White Rope and the Red Rope at the same time. And I was also on the Combat Ready Intelligence Team, meaning I was learning like self-aid buddy care, even though it wasn't necessary. And I was with a group of people who were pretty fit, because I was also pretty fit for my cross-country days and track days in high school. So I just had to build up a little bit of muscle, and I was probably one of the most fit people there at the time. And got 100 on my PT test. After 9 October 2018, I left the Presidio of Monterey in Monterey, California, and I went to Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas, I think. San Angelo, Texas. Stayed there until December, learning other parts of my job, like the technical side of my job. And then I went to take leave, about a month of leave. Arrived on station here in Augusta, Georgia, to work at Fort Gordon in January of 2019, and I've been here ever since. I finally got into my job, able to do my job. My clearance went through in July of 2019. That's also when I made the rank of Senior Airman below the zone for all the stuff that I did in tech school. That was really the only reason that I did all that stuff in tech school. I think it helped me grow, find out what I want to do. Like, it helped me explore different avenues, pushed me because I wanted to get that below the zone, wanted to get that extra money early. So I think that was a positive experience too. But once I got into the building, I just didn't really like it. I was an average performer, I guess, maybe sub-average in the job. We had these career development courses that we had to take throughout, and there was one test I just couldn't pass. I had to take it like 3 times. But otherwise, even if I was an average performer or above average performer, my mission basically went away in March of 2020, not even due to COVID, just because of the nature of my mission. It just went away. And so I went into mission management from March of 2020 until August of 2020, as much as we could during that time with COVID mitigation measures. And August of 2020, because again, I was very fit at the time, they made me the unit fitness program manager for my squadron. So I did that from 2020 until 2021, August 2020 until August of 2021. From there, I was recruited into the COVID pandemic response team for Fort Gordon. And I did that until April of 2022. From there, I was a command executive assistant for the commander of the NSA site here at Fort Gordon, and did that until November of 2022. November 2022 until the start of 2023, I was on leave. I took like a really long day of leave, or a month of leave, block of leave, because I hadn't taken leave since 2020. I needed the break. And then when I got back, my swan song, my final job was the Occupational Health and Wellbeing Program Manager Assistant, which is basically like being an EA for all the program managers down in the OHS, OSHA, safety, occupational health areas of any like corporate work center. And now, you probably see this on the 31st of May. I'm recording this May 30th. May 31st is my first day of terminal leave. I'll be out of the Air Force, finishing up my 6-year active duty obligation in July 10 of this year, and then headed to nursing school at a local college in August of this year, 2023. I want to outline this in detail to say that I was initially a high performer who wanted to succeed and excel in my job, and was open to the idea of staying in the military in some capacity. The capacity would expand or shrink, of course, based on how much I enjoyed my time, from becoming an officer to being a guard/reservist. And now, I don't think I want to have any sort of involvement with the military, commissioning, active duty, guard, reserve, anything like that. I still want to use the benefits I've amassed from my time in. I like to call it like my indentured servitude, because it's what I did to pay for college. Came from a pretty bad home life, needed to get out of the house. This gave me, like I said before, money, time to think, a place to explore interests without fear of reprisal. It was an overall good thing for me, but not something that I want to continue with. And just so I can semi-prove, I'm not gonna go through all my awards, but this is my printout of all my medals from the MPF. And I know that, actually no, I didn't tell you this, all my medals, and then this is what it should look like when everything's said and done. I'm waiting on this medal right here, the Joint Service Commendation Medal, to go through, and when that's updated, that my VMPF record should be updated. Yeah. So, I'll first address the everyday aspects of service, and then how those actions shape and select for the personalities who encourage and perpetuate these actions. And then finally, I'll examine the culture that arises from and perpetuates these actions. From the start of my military career, I was given a set of tasks to complete: memorize ranks, make my bed, learn customs and courtesies, so on. There are parts of this learning process that do make sense. Everyone should be oriented with their chain of command, proper terms of address, ranks, duty titles. But there are other aspects that seem superfluous to me. Uniforms and certain courtesies are chief among them. The differences between officer and enlisted, from what I understand, basically boil down to the level of investment by the Air Force and how that level of investment influences their stratification within their roles. The officer, having a bachelor's degree and potentially job experience like internships a couple years after college, they require fewer investment for their training And so they need to only learn like military stuff, like rank, structure. Enlisted personnel are treated like blank slates, like tabula rasa, matched with career fields where they show the greatest aptitude and receive all necessary training to become job proficient. Officers, in theory, will use their experience and their degree to manage the enlisted personnel underneath them to accomplish missions. The fact that we have to salute the lower company grade officers, though, of 01 through 03, due to this distinction, seems to me a bit ridiculous. Unnecessary would be a better term, I think. Comparing a technical sergeant with 15 years in service to someone who's my age, 23, who, let's be honest, a lot of people don't use the military as their first choice. So let's say he's 23, probably spent the last 4 years of his life getting hammered at parties, and then used the military as a backup plan when he found out that his 2.3 GPA wasn't enough for grad school, or they were in ROTC just to pay for college, and they don't want to do more than their 4-year term. I understand the importance of respecting the senior officers and their experiences and their insight, but these new officers are new to service. They received the rank from 01 through 03 because they had a passable resume, passable physical fitness, a need for the Air Force. The promotions from 01 to 03 are automatic, and therefore they haven't really earned their ranks. They've only shown an aptitude for military service in a given career field and do not require as much investment for training compared to enlisted personnel. If we could change the rules for saluting, where we only salute 04 and above, I think there'd be far better quality of life for younger airmen. Because the worst interactions that I've had with officers have consistently been those in the 01 through 03 ranks. The younger officers have a lot to prove, and removing this saluting requirement, making them just like the E5 through E6. Removing this would prevent them from exercising the little authority they have to make up for the feelings of powerlessness that they more than likely feel in other areas of work, because the life of new officers is very difficult. As flight commanders, they are the true middle of the rank structure, saddled with the welfare and productivity of anywhere from 20 to 100 people, probably for the first time in their life. Not only during the duty hours, but when emergencies happen over the weekend, they have to be ready too. Anything that comes from above has to be carried out pronto. The mistakes are highlighted and successes are only praised for the exceptional events or maybe a quarterly award. In the case where they are prior enlisted, this time without salutes would serve as a buffer where they can focus on the work-related differences between enlisted and commissioned ranks, instead of focusing on the puerile enforcement of customs, courtesies, and other standards. Officers could instead view the enlisted as a peers, rather than subordinates. They could adapt to military life and learn from more experienced members of the force. To show respect for those who went through all of that in the 01 through 03 ranks for 4 years, and then they decide to re-up, yeah, no, I'm gonna salute. I would willingly salute. I also want to make a note that prior enlisted officers are not always exceptions. They're either a very chill person because they know what the enlisted people go through and they actually care for their airmen because there's a shared experience there. Or there's some like 10-year former staff sergeant from maintenance. They got their online social studies degree, something like resource business leadership management. I saw one psychology thing. He's a unicorn. Psychology is if you want to push yourself, I guess. And then suddenly they feel superior to the enlisted when they were just one of us a couple months ago. And then sort of related to this is the idea of an honor position when you're walking with someone. If you don't know, the honor position is that you have to let the higher ranking person walk to the right of you. And that's the dumbest rule I've ever heard. That's like the sidewalk rule on TikTok, where if he doesn't walk on the outside of the sidewalk, he's not a real boy, he's not the one. No, it's stupid. It's stupid. The last thing on officers calling the room to attention when an officer walks in is something that no one really likes to do. I understand doing it for all calls, other mass events. That way everyone knows the ceremony, the event is about to take place and we should get seated, shut up, like sit through it, get ready. But just working in an office and then having someone yell, stand by, because some LT got lost on the way to the bathroom. It's unnecessary. We don't need to do that. Luckily, most of the senior officers I've met don't seem to like this rule either. Most senior officers, when they do come down to meet me, others on a human level, they only do so as like a show of face, which is conveniently right before a climate survey, or conveniently on like a very specific first Monday of the month, last Friday of the month. The apathy towards those at lower ranks is also something that I want to touch on later. But regarding the attention part, at its worst, the rule can serve as an excuse for some frustrated officers to let out their frustrations on someone who may not notice their arrival, to feel powerful in some way after however long they felt powerless or unappreciated in their current role, situated all the enlisted, lower officers, upper officers. They're right in the middle. That's a lot of stress. The uniforms are overly complex and downright stupid sometimes. We have OCPs, PTUs, and like 4 different combinations of the Blues uniforms. I think many of the uniform combos can and should be done away with entirely. And we need at least to review and expand upon the uniform modifications for different jobs. The worst uniform, by far, the PT uniform. While I'm making this, I've heard rumors of new PT uniforms for the past 2 years, but still nothing has been shown, nothing's been brought forward. I'm not opposed to using it for basic training, but it should be like the tidy-whitey underwear, where afterwards we can dispose of them if we want and get something better. The shirts, they're not breathable. The shorts, personally, I've always modified them to cut out that built-in underwear pouch. And the tracksuits are ugly. They're like relics of the 90s. We buy civilian workout gear to PT on our own. If you're like me, you enjoy fitness, and even if someone doesn't work out until that final month before their PT test, they could still hold on to that PT uniform from basic training and work out in it if they really needed to, if they really didn't want to spend the money on other workout gear. Chances are they're gonna buy something more comfortable to work out in, but in the chance that they don't want to, it's like tidy-whities. You could hang on to it if you want to, but you're gonna be really weird. Paired with this, I think we should also be able to test in whatever clothing we want. We already know, or we already allow for diversity of footwear. Like, they don't monitor or regulate what kind of running shoes you wear. And that's arguably the most important article of clothing when you're taking a test, where the cardio portion is what gives you the most points. So if they really cared about the PTU, they would have a list of approved parameters to control for people. People like me, I buy the Nike Tempo because I like the way it springs when I'm at that fast pace. And then the other people that just sort of wear the BMT, New Balances, Asics, stuff like that. Besides, in a scenario where something hits the fan and we need to react physically to a threat, we're gonna be in OCPs more than likely. So taking the test in a lighter uniform without weapons and gear isn't relevant practice to that crisis scenario where we're gonna be working probably in a deployed environment in our OCPs, and then we get attacked. Running in boots is a lot different than running in shorts and a t-shirt. So the test should either be really real, like really real-based scenario like the Marines, or it should be wear whatever you want, dress however you want, just get these standards met. The OCPs are unnecessary for the majority of jobs. Like me, I work in an office all day. When I cross that parking lot in those itchy knee-high socks, boots, blousing straps, cargo pants, a shirt, a blouse, or blousing straps around my ankles, a blouse, and a hat. And the hat, it doesn't even keep the sun out of my eyes. That OCP patrol cap, it does not work. It's like way too much. In the Georgia sun in the summer, way too much clothing. So I know that maintainers, other people who are deployed, probably have a much more difficult time. Deployments, it seems like that's what we should wear though. Deployments, I can't see anything any way around wearing them. But otherwise, if you're like stateside, there's a lot of cases where wearing an OCP shouldn't be necessary. The idea of having everyone wear the same uniform despite their job is what I consider to be like a lackluster show of unity. Certain jobs are more demanding in physical or mental or emotional aspects, and our uniform should reflect that. We don't all wear gas masks or safety goggles or have to carry a rifle just because other career fields do. We should have the option to wear something more casual or professional as appropriate for our career field. This could even be a benefit, as having someone's rank and insignia on like the back of a t-shirt, jersey style, would be way more noticeable across the flight line than these spice brown, low contrast OCP color scheme patches. For office jobs like mine, if we could have the option to wear color-coded professional attire year-round, maybe just like every Friday instead of just the last couple Fridays in November before like a holiday break. I don't know if they do that in other places. That's what we do here. It would be such a good improvement to quality of life. This is especially true for jobs like mine, where I work very closely alongside civilian personnel, because the treatment that I get in uniform versus out of uniform, it's night and day. Unless you're like a senior officer, most people just write you off as grunt, stupid, do the menial tasks, not like a person. They don't treat you well. They don't treat you like a person. Yeah, unless you prove otherwise, because you're in their shop. Blues, they're good for public events and formal events, but I think there should only be the long sleeve shirt with tie combo. The short sleeve shirts with no necktie, they're pretty ugly. They make us look like mechanics or mailman. No offense to those professions, but that's not really a military look. The color, the texture combos, they're atrocious too. I got them right here. And I looked them up. The last time that these were modified was back in 1999. That's the same year that I was born. It's also a period of time, I believe, where the US government had a policy called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And when you don't have gay people in, you get stuff like this. You get blue on blue on blue with black shoes, with a blue belt, with a blue coat. And it doesn't look good. Not a good color combo, not a good texture combo. Overall, just very weird, very not good. Yeah, that's what happens when you don't let gay people in. You look fucking awful. I think it's a time for a change in the Blues uniform, a change in the right direction. Maybe at least like brown shoes, brown and blue, like a pretty standard color combo. But right now, the Air Force doesn't really have a style. Like, you think about the average military person, and you can tell the average military E9, bald guy, really tight Oakleys, drives a truck, wears a t-shirt with the American flag right here, khaki shorts. Like, that's who would design something like that. The worst part, oh my God, the worst part, the cover. I don't know who designed this cover, right? Who designed this cover? It's supposed to look like this. We're supposed to have it at an angle like this, like off center. It is, no one looks good with a cone head. I don't know why they would make it like that. It reminds me of when I was in high school, before I joined. I worked part-time at Steak and Shake, and we had to wear one of those old chef hats from like 1950s. You could look it up, but just really a relic of the past. But regardless, I also think that hats and covers and patrol caps, like overall, they should be optional in every circumstance, for every uniform, outside of official events, formations, stuff like that. Because we already have regulations on saluting without headgear, so there's no reason that we should have to wear them. Related to uniforms are the dress and appearance standards. We should be allowed to have beards, like just straight up. Beards, piercings, tattoos, any hairstyle we want. If the FSC that we're in, our job, doesn't have safety requirements for it. I've heard the justification for beards that we can't have them because we need to be able to fit into a gas mask securely. But if that were the case, then we wouldn't have so many religious exemptions, because I really doubt that the government's gonna say, oh, yeah, God got you. Yeah, no, God got you. He got you. Yeah, God always saves people from poisonous gas. Yeah, yeah. It's just stupid. There's special, I've heard there are special gas mask inserts that they make for people with beards. But if that were the case, then why not just let someone purchase that other gas mask insert on their own with their own money if they elect to have a beard? I find it stupid that I had to shave every day. I shaved today because it was my last day in uniform. But I used to have to shave every day, tear up my skin until I could see a doctor, just so they could look at me and tell me what I already know. What anyone would already know from looking at the ingrown hairs, the scars on my face, that I shouldn't be doing that so much, and I need a waiver. Not only that, but I don't have any gas masks around me in my workplace. Like, there's none at all. If there was a chemical attack, like there was an actual chemical attack, I would die. I would die with a buttery smooth face. I mean, even during the gas chamber in basic training, my flight was told by multiple MTIs off the record not to shave, or at least not to shave closely before we entered the gas chamber, because it would make it hurt more if it got into those scratches, scrapes, nicks, cuts, micro cuts. Furthermore, the idea of a professional military appearance, right? I think that's rooted in a time in American history where minorities, primarily black people, were considered like a separate class of people. The standard for shaving arose because we had a whites-only military, and most white people can shave every day without much harm. Times have changed since then, though. We're more diverse than ever, and our hair and grooming standards should reflect this diversity. The idea of a uniform military appearance sort of went out the window when we started letting women in, black people, Hispanics, Chinese, Asians, and so the standards should be modified to reflect this diversity. There have been recent changes in female hair standards, and shaving profile waivers and POC hair standards were just updated a couple months ago, but the expansion of these borders isn't eliminating them, right? There's still borders, and because there are borders, there's still that stigma. The senior high-ranking people who've been in forever, for all their life, and they've happily, proudly complied with shaving every day, any other standards, their whole career, they're gonna have some resentment. Like, surely there's gonna be some resentment for those who don't comply with the same standards. Because anyone who would choose to shave every day, now that they have the options, must be a true military professional in their eyes. And I know that because I've heard it, I'm paraphrasing of course, in a meeting from an 06 to a room of senior enlisted and other field grade officers who just nodded in approval. Again, I think that we should remove the standard entirely for dress and appearance and grooming, and only have instructions specific to AFSCs, or those fringe cases where it becomes a hygiene issue. Let there be no hair standard initially, and then make adjustments as needed by AFSC. Let facial hair and grooming be subjective, and then make adjustments as needed by AFSC. If we make this the standard, then we can see a future where remarks like that colonel's are met with weird looks or questions instead of just solidarity. Regardless of my opinions on these issues, though, I comply with them because I have to. It's currently in my job description as an airman. If there are things I forget when performing my job, like not putting on my patrol cap before walking into the office, not saluting someone because I'm having a conversation, or the sun's in my eyes, or not getting a haircut over the weekend, and having like 2 millimeters of hair on my ears because I was busy with something else more important, then I face counseling, admonishment, or reprimand. In most cases, I've had understanding leadership, but the few cases where I've had an animos supervisor reprimand me, outside of basic or tech school, of course, they show me a very disagreeable system of rule enforcement and punishment that bad superiors, enlisted and officer, can abuse. The times where a supervisor or superior corrected me on a personal level, where they ask me like, hey, do you have your cover? Or an officer says, good morning to me first, and then I salute back. Or where they ask me, is everything okay? Because I noticed you didn't get a haircut in a while. Are you like too busy? What's wrong? These corrections, they were kept at a personal level, without paperwork, and they happened because of the good nature of the other person, where they didn't know me, and in the cases where they did, my past record of okay performance. The times where I was reprimanded harshly were by new superiors, new supervisors, or just outright strangers on the street. And a system of rules and regulations where someone can take it upon themselves to take corrective action in a very unnecessarily harsh manner isn't one that I want to work within. The rules and the regulations, I think, should be designed with these people in mind to prohibit them from acting like that. I know this might sound a bit like me just being like, oh, you're a whiny little bitch, huh? Who don't want to be yelled at, yeah? Oh, you don't like being yelled at? But these people who yell at me, they have the ability to impact my career. They can literally keep money away from me and put me in a bad state. They can put in a bad word for my command that prevents me from getting a base of preference, or being selected for special duties, being selected for deployments. The system is designed for lower ranking members to only sort of comply, unquestioningly, with these orders and with our superiors. And no one really wants to hear reasons why anyone would be non-compliant. It doesn't matter how minor the regulation either. The reasons are irrelevant in these instances. And the times where I have tried to make a case for myself are often just seen as disrespectful, backtalk, the kind of language that you would expect to hear from like really like an authoritarian parent talking down to their child. Not a higher ranking person that you've never met before. Not someone who's supposed to be a military professional. In a way, if I want to give them the most gracious benefit of the doubt, I can understand where this imperative and authoritarian nature come from. It might even be the more accurate reason, as I've never been an O1 or O3, or any rank higher than E5, so I don't know for certain what they could be experiencing or thinking as a group. A more charitable explanation also makes for a better basis for improving the system of rules and regulations, so I want to explore it. I think this irascibility of certain supervisors could also be a cyclical cycle that stems from the grave nature of military service. Lives are directly on the line in more than a few AFSCs, and indirectly at stake in all others. To prepare us for these vitally important roles, basic training, technical training, they take an absolutist form. We live regimented lives for the 2 months of basic training, show we can adhere to small tasks like folding clothes, making our bed, and the Air Force then trusts us with greater responsibilities as we progress through technical training, get to our first duty station, progress through the ranks, so on and so forth. All of this is in the effort of forging people who can accomplish those missions and save lives, either directly by getting our people out of harm's way, or indirectly by preventing enemies from committing further actions against us or our allies. The missions we carry out for the sake of saving these lives are often traumatic for those airmen who are on the tip of the spear. From their successes and failures, they learn in hindsight to remain hypervigilant to standards, and they invent new ones in order to prevent the future loss of life. Often, though, this desire to protect life turns toxic. They become neurotic, and this neuroticism takes an active form in the emotion of anger. Thus, every rule is subject to enforcement with a bellicosity, because they believe that the ones who came before them and made the existing rules did so for a very good reason. They think that leniency in one area, even if it's small, is indicative of leniency in all other areas. And that person who can't meet the standards, who can't do what they're told, who can't do the simple stuff right, could eventually create further tragedy, further loss of life. But I think this is a mistake that comes from these veterans and senior members just not resolving their trauma. And it only serves to make new airmen unnecessarily hypervigilant and neurotic themselves. To reiterate, The hypervigilance of those more punitive supervisors could stem not just from feelings of inferiority, but also from their own unresolved trauma. Because of this trauma, they become hypervigilant to standards set forth by superiors and extend this neuroticism. They broaden it to the most minute details. New airmen are expected to display their hypervigilance in whatever task they're assigned, from making their beds, learning their trade in tech school, showing the capacity for leadership at their first duty station by volunteering for squadron car wash, squadron program, something like that. A lack of attention to detail doesn't just mean, well, attention to detail, that's what they use a lot. It doesn't just mean that an airman is bad at folding clothes, or they had trouble on a part of a test, or that they just aren't interested in running a car wash for the squadron. These mistakes are seen as indicators of the character, the quality, the personality of the airman as a whole. They're then reprimanded with severity because the supervisors think that the airman's inattentiveness or lackadaisical attitude or general lack of interest leads to someone getting killed. Because this hypervigilance theoretically prevents the loss of life, new airmen gain trust not because they're really good at making beds, but because their supervisors see in them the intent to not lose focus when lives are at stake, the intent to save lives, the ability to save lives. And so they think of these airmen as good, capital G, ontologically good. While this is the basic core of any safety course, really, for like any job, right? Like, don't put your hand on the saw blade. The fervor with which these standards are enforced, carried out, the fervor with which they're allowed to be enforced, they're encouraged to be enforced, I think stems from unresolved trauma on like a mass scale, on like an organizational scale. A new airman's hypervigilance, their hyper-attentive submission to authority is only a fledgling proof of this ontological goodness, though. To succeed and gain rank, airmen must distinguish themselves from peers. A reliable and encouraged method of doing this is by enforcing the standards themselves. So they constantly search for others who deviate and then facilitate their correction in the view of leadership whenever possible. These hounds are then heralded as a whistleblower, someone who found and pointed out the rotting beam of a foundation of a building that we're all living in and had it remedied before the ineptitude of that beam, of that foundation, could harm us. And that cements them as the peers of the supervisors. Even if they haven't made the rank yet, when the time comes, they will make that rank. They will get that opportunity to shine even more and make the rank when the time comes. The contrast between those who do meet the standard and these airmen's own who do not meet the standard, and these airmen's own adherence and enforcement make new airmen stand out. Because not only did they prevent the loss of life through their own actions, they were able to enact that through the actions of others. And so they show an aptitude for leadership. The airmen who internalize this hypervigilance and to take it upon themselves to seek out others who can't, don't, won't comply, are most likely to seek out and be selected for leadership roles. Once they attain this leadership role, in rank or designation, they will further express aggression against anyone who deviates from the authority, this time using their own institutional power. Hypervigilant enforcement of the rules and a desire to be seen enforcing them to gain more sure status as ontologically good within the system leads to this like a phenomena, like a spectacle, a desire to be seen performing well and above your peers. You gain the validation of even the most hard-charging superiors in the organization, and you prove yourself through the fire of inspections, excellent job proficiency, concerning yourself with those really small, like really ancillary things. That's only going to appeal, like doing all these things is only going to appeal to a few high performers. These high performers are rewarded and highlighted by leadership as positive examples that others should strive to emulate and to learn from. As a result, individuals are encouraged only to succeed within the system and not to consider the impact that said system has on their personhood, what it makes of them, what these actions turn them into. And so they're not primed to change the system. They don't think about the rules because someone, a really long time ago, made them up for a good reason. And they've gotten us this far, so there's no reason for us to question them. They don't resolve the trauma, either from being on the tip of the spear or from the beratement of supervisors who have. And so they take part in the same corrosive behaviors as the leaders prior. Change and healing are never a tasker in a substantive way. They are indoctrinated into this cult of tradition. I think this inability to reconsider what parts of the system are truly necessary and to what degree they are important is also largely informed by a combination of inexperience within the military, inherent lack of power in our lower enlisted ranks, and the physical inability for the mind to think critically or clearly during periods of acute or prolonged stress. Once airmen have finally reached a rank and status within the system where they have the power to effect a change for the lives of even just one or two direct subordinates, where they are proficient enough in their job to operate on their own and even train others, they're often so indoctrinated by the system that they repeat the same traumatic methods of rule enforcement. The system is designed by form, function, and faculty to not invite critique. They don't seem to want it to change. Even those people who want to make change and have a positive impact will be unable to make substantial changes, because the majority of people who strive to reach those ranks only do so because they like how it is, they like how it sounds, they like what that rank is. I mean to say that we as airmen know what awaits us at higher ranks because of the professional development guides, mentorship we get from leaders. We know what we're getting into at those higher ranks. We also know from training and a little bit of common sense that the military and the DoD overall is a very large organization with innumerable policies and doctrines that control it. It's common sense for me, I think, that a large structure with innumerable points of tension is less inclined to change. What this means to me is that people within the Air Force tacitly accept the inability to change their environment due to the social factors like leadership, organizational factors like rules and regulations, and the governmental factors of policy that are far beyond our control or our purview. The only people who want those higher ranks, therefore, largely don't want change. They succeeded from Airman Basic to Technical Sergeant by devoting themselves to the Air Force, and they liked it enough to go for Master. They buy into this cult of action. The amount of stress, the amount of effort that I and many others would put in to attempt to change would be wasted. We can find happier lives on the outside pursuing civilian career paths with better work-life balances, to leave more time for family and hobbies, and so I and many others simply bide our time until the end of our contract. But even then, people like me are complicit in perpetuating the system because we didn't even try to make it better. We were selfish, and that too leaves feelings that we need to resolve. To a lesser extent, it also causes a bit of trauma. How do I not feel guilty knowing that I can name 20 things I don't like about the system? I have more on the way, but I don't know any tangible solutions. I don't know if there are solutions in many cases. The system, it makes you feel bad for thinking differently because you can't really think of anything else to do. So you just come across as a negative Nancy, someone who complains all the time and should really just be quiet and shut up and do the work. Just don't think about it, just do. Just act. Not for the lives of the people beside us, if not to save them, then at least to be one less point of stress on these people who are already stressed out, working themselves to the bone, trying to complete all these taskers, all these actions, never having time to sit and think and reflect, to heal. More to the point of the high performers, though, those who master the art of the spectacle and become the top performers of the top performers. These are the stars of the organization. These people serve as objects we can identify with to cope with the stress placed upon us. The living stars are senior enlisted and officers, the dead and memorialized, like the people with dining facilities and clinics named after them. We often look to them to vicariously compensate for the minimal impacts that our own efforts yield, both in primary duties, where most give the hardest effort, where most people devote the majority of their time, and in those ancillary portions, which many people don't really care about. We're only doing it because it's a box check. It's just a tasker that we have to do. But they take up time, all those ancillary actions. But again, to neglect something as small as the hair on the side of your head shows a lack of hypervigilance that everyone is expected to have. And so peers, superiors, they look down on you. They'll punish you. They'll make you out to be beneath them in every possible way. Because again, in their minds, their actions are saving lives. These stars, though, they receive the results of military service that common people will often never receive, no matter how many years they serve. A widespread sense of honor, respect, and reverence. The decision-making, the training at the beginning and end of the daily lives or missions of these stars is often never questioned, nor do the dead stars find much critique for their lack of hypervigilance if their death is notable in some way, if they were special forces, if they were the first death in a conflict. This is again because the enforcers of the power and reputation of the stars do not accept or create an environment for thought. And if you can't think on an action, you can't critique it. They become something more than human when they become these objects of admiration. They become myths and legends. They become the ground beneath our feet. The ground beneath our feet when we name a road after them. They become the nourishment that fuels us when we name a dining facility after them. They become the body through which we operate when we name an operations building after them. They serve as an unattainable example of what we can accomplish if we do everything correctly. Should we maintain this hypervigilance and perform all of our duties as required, we can be heroes. We can be like them. We're taught to be like them. We're taught to be heroes. And so the status of these stars is always upheld, and those who buy into the narrative that these stars represent are just further bought into the military way of life. The stars that we highlight and aspire to be, they represent the Air Force on an internal scale, but also a public scale. But even then, they don't represent the everyday experiences of the laymen, the lay airmen. Material goals for better tools, systems, they're never addressed. Not by the living stars like the enlisted or officers, like the high-ranking enlisted, high-ranking officers, the public. We're lucky to get anything other than lip service until a groundswell of support and advocacy for change can't be ignored anymore. And even then, piecemeal compromises are made to only sustain the system instead of making a change, like the black and female hair standards, the black beard standards, or there's some black-centric organization that did a study on beards. I forget the name of the organization, but you could Google like Air Force Black Beard Study. They basically said, like, let us have beards. And I said, how about you come in once a year so we can check if you still are black with black hair? How about that? And we'll let one of you be on honor guard. Deal? It's piecemeal compromise. Many seniors still will look down on those who choose to cut their hair or to not cut their hair, because they'll see it as taking the lazy way out, or how, at least on paper, like I said before, those with beard waivers can now serve on honor guard. But given the culture and the climate of every other squadron I've been to, you're going to be hard-pressed to find any superior officer, any E9 or 05, 06 or above, willing to put more than one like token representative on an otherwise uniform team of clean faces, or clean-shaven faces. Just because they can do something, just because there's the opportunity for these people to come in, doesn't mean they will. And even when there is a soft push to do so, they only do the bare minimum to show that they're doing their part to accelerate change, and then get a good eval to again climb the ranks from their current position. bandages are applied. Additional organizations to address the fallout from failing systems are made, but no true reform ever comes. It's like you're in a house where the roof is leaking. So they say, okay, I'm gonna make a task force, organization, bucket brigade. And they buy time and they mitigate the damage until they can finally patch the hole. Only then to find there's another leak. And they never realize that the problems, these leaks, are inherent to the superannuation, the expiration of the roof itself, the system as a whole. I don't want to make it seem like I don't appreciate the sacrifices of the fallen, the POWs, or the living leaders, but they're often glorified beyond personhood or critique. Their mistakes are often swept under the rug, and when they are public, they're never really gonna face punishment like myself or other lower ranking people would. The most that will happen is like a loss in confidence and then a forced retirement. And then they're just replaced with another star, plucked from some obscure portion of the ranks, who serves the same role. They receive unconditional praise, and I think that's dangerous. I think this praise is dangerous in the context of the military, because if becoming a hero is the end goal, and yeah, there are some who say they joined because they wanted to serve their country, right? They call themselves patriots. But if you're at the point where you're calling yourself patriot, then I don't think you're a patriot, because you wouldn't be so vocal about it if you were really about it. And they're vocal about it on very large, very small platforms, like some grifter on the Joe Rogan podcast, or that one guy who made Vet TV. Like, it's very clear, to me at least, the way I see it, that they're using their service to gain favor, just so they can sell stuff to people. It's a grift. Like, through and through, it seems like a grift. Because if they joined to serve, they wouldn't center themselves or their service or their product. Anyone who really cares would continue to serve until they retired, and then volunteer at some like existing nonprofit. The fact that they feel the need to tell people they served, whether that's through conversation, face-to-face, or over social media, shows that they're only using their service to get you to buy a product, follow them on Instagram, direct resources to their own nonprofit, which anyone who's done research on nonprofits, you'll realize, like, within 5 minutes that it's just a corporation, a company that doesn't have to pay taxes, and they don't make a profit because all the money goes to the workers. Who's the head worker of the company? The CEO, the head guy. Oh, he's the head guy. Oh, he's getting all that money. Wow, great. People, they proclaim their service because they want to get something from it. And not in the form of benefits, but by leveraging the social capital of being a veteran to exploit average Americans who don't really understand service, but they still respect the troops, and to appeal to those disenfranchised veterans who really are just gonna cling to anyone who shows them even an ounce of compassion, an ounce of like humanity, even if it's fake. These people aspire to become heroes outside, and there are people inside who aspire to become heroes. Most people who like the military, deep down, they aspire to be heroes because that's what we're taught. Becoming a hero while in the military is pretty dangerous though, because the only way you can become a hero is by placing yourself in harm's way. This ideal makes them want conflict. It encourages conflict. When you're taught to be a hero, and your heroes are without faults and they're beyond critique, and when everyone who educates you to become a hero says that it can come from following orders, and questioning orders is a faux pas, then you're basically primed to walk unflinchingly into your own death, to be happy about your death. When you set yourself upon death, you give up your life. Your life isn't your own anymore. And instead of being a slave to genetic code, like some other bug or insect, you're instead a slave to a code of rules and regulations and heroic worship, like an ideals of heroic worship. You're like, I should have wrote this down. You're like a bug right? Like a maggot. And maybe one day, they're telling you, maybe one day, you're gonna be a beautiful butterfly flying over the rainbow. Most maggots aren't gonna turn into butterflies, and most will turn into a fly, and they'll never get more than 6 feet off the ground. But there's hope. They're made to believe that they can be great. And so now, while they're on the ground, they'll more readily, more eagerly eat all the shit they put in front of them. To cope with our present lack of star status and lack of heroism, we're made to feel good for the minor accomplishments at various points in our career. We're told we are the strongest Air Force and part of the world's strongest military in basic training. We're told we're part of a special minority of the American populace. Less than 1%, something they like to say in basic training, a lot. Even the Marines, they use it explicitly in their ads, the few, the proud. You pair these together with the previously mentioned competitive want to stand out from peers, and there results this feeling of elitism as you climb the ranks. You gain ranks, and then you lead more and more people. There are fewer and fewer people of you, of that less than 1%, of that proud few. And you lead them because you stand out from them, meaning that if they're below you, they must not have proved themselves in the same way from you, the same way you did. You must be better than them. They must be weaker than you. And so feelings of contempt grow towards them. They must be so weak that you now need to lead them and enforce standards and to show them the way. And if one of them talks back to you or questions you, I mean, how dare they, right? How dare they? You know better than them. And now you have that power to correct them. Now you can show them how they can be a star like you. I spoke earlier on how people are made to assimilate and then perpetuate the system, and how a compulsion for accomplishing tasks prevents introspection. This is again due to the physical stress, our lack of knowledge of the system, and our positional inability as lower ranking people. All of these discourage change. So there's an implication here that once we reach a higher rank, once we learn the system and get out of basic or tech school and have time to relax, reflect, that we will be able to make decisions. Because those in higher ranks enforce these standards upon us, they must have taken their time, used their knowledge and experience, and then discerned what is really important, and then found the best way to accomplish these most important tasks. The thinking in our heads was already accomplished by someone prior, someone with more insight, experience, someone who knows better, because those at higher ranks are older, right? They've been in for a long time. They're 50, 60 years old. And they too learned from and leaned on their superiors. There's this resultant rejection of contemporary thought. Even the professional development books and the courses we're encouraged to read, the courses we're encouraged to take by senior leadership, they're rooted in the cultural traditions of a modern, like 1950s modern America, or even farther back, which is happening recently. I'll talk more on that later. And they only serve to justify our existence as we are, and examine different ways in which we got it right back then, and we need to keep doing it now. Because for the military overall, we see authors like John Maxwell, Simon Sinek, Malcolm Gladwell, and a couple novels that are of note that I'll talk about near the end. The main one is Starship Troopers, but all of these are recommended reading for our personal professional development. They're recommended for development, but again, only into a better, more efficient enforcer of the status quo. They use contemporaneous language to restate and to re-justify the existing systems, and are recommended only because of their success in justifying the existing system or placating the people within it. The most critical thought individuals take is towards the preservation of the system, in spite of cultural changes at home and differences on the modern battlefield, because they have their orders. And again, those in power determined it to be right because of a proven history. To question such an authority is illogical. They want you to keep moving, even when they give you no reason. or a clear objective. We have the phrase, hurry up and wait, because we take actions simply for the sake of motion. We're told to accomplish a task only to find out days later that we need to undo that task because no one stopped to think if that was the correct action to take. If you disagree or you question orders, that results in a delay of executing those orders. And if you aren't following those orders, if there's a delay, there's a time where you aren't completing the order, then you haven't followed that order. If you've refused to follow that order because you want to ask questions, that's treated with really severe consequences, because that's refusing to follow an order. That's like treason. And no one wants to be a traitor, if not because they want to attain that carrot that we dangle in front of us, of service excellence, become a star, become a hero, then at least to escape that rod that they're going to smack us with, to punish us if we don't follow along. This system makes people fear differences of thought and opinion, because pausing to consider an order could lead to delays in saving lives, or to their own punishment. You remember how I said there was an incentive to find and expose the non-compliant? Well, this is one such action that could warrant exposition on the part of a high achiever. Disagreement stalls the mission accomplishment and would give our enemies more opportunities to cause harm, or could result in a lack of support to allies and cost them their lives. An airman who would harm his fellow brothers in arms has committed treason. Stereotypes for those who would dare to question why they need to do something, or outright refuse to find more accommodating duties are thus made. Stereotypes for those who would dare to question why they need to do something or outright refuse and instead find more accommodating duties are thus made, and terms of contempt are generated. Things like egghead, fobbit, oxygen thief, plant eater. These terms also apply to people who do jobs other than the most masculine or virile in the military. For now, I want to address seeing the people beside you as a potential source of danger just for asking a question is a very insidious ideology. One that was only made worse by the war on terror and the general perception of whistleblowers within the intelligence community and the military at large. The war on terror has forever changed the world we live in. And I, as a 23-year-old, know this because anyone over 40 is never going to shut up about how 9/11 changed everything. The idea that anyone, including our neighbors, could one day turn coat and do harm to their fellow countrymen led to a reactionary way of thinking. Though completely understandable in the context of the time. And it was only exacerbated in the military. This inherently neurotic institution, the inherently neurotic people inside of it, found some plot in which the country they love is under attack from people within and an organization without, making their hypochondriac fantasies a reality. American Muslims faced the worst discrimination, as they had familial, religious, and cultural ties to the enemy. I think the best example of this is the fact that today, last I checked about a week ago, there are only 9 Muslim chaplains in the whole military. The whole military. Like there's 5 in the Army, 3 in the Air Force, 2 in the... 1 in the Navy. The levels of Islamophobia in the military and out, as in their prevalence, what percentage of service members held Islamophobic beliefs compared to the general population, I'm sure was higher, if only because the first interaction that many Americans had was 9/11 with Muslims. And then for people in the service, that was closely followed up with combat by the most radical followers of that faith, of that region, of that culture. Even if I'm wrong, right? And we say that the rate of bigotry in the military was the same as the civilian world. The military's organizational structure allowed those in power, and continues to allow those in power, not just for Muslims, but any other minority, any other group they deem weird, otherized, more harshly than, say, a civilian boss would be able to against these Muslims. They give lip service to notable cases about investigations into potential discrimination or hate crimes, but nothing substantial ever happens to perpetrators. All we seem to get is another PowerPoint presentation telling us not to be racist, and people are not held accountable, and there aren't really good systems in place to prevent it from happening again. Stepping away from matters of faith, members who hail from different countries too, whether they come over as adults and take the oath of citizenship when they graduate basic training, or they cross the border a couple months after they were born because their parents finally gained citizenship or visas. These people are asked to gauge, using percentages, their level of allegiance to, like, Mexico versus the US, in addition to the background checks that everyone has to do. And that's like a really weird thing. Like, I find that really ridiculous. That's like, I think it was Breaking Bad, where some guy was talking to a cop and he said, "Are you a cop? You gotta tell me if you're a cop, dude. Like, it's the law. You gotta tell me. It's legally, you have to tell me if you're an undercover cop, dude." Like, the fact that they think they could catch a terrorist, or someone would willingly say, "Oh no, I love Mexico way more than America. That's why I want to fight in the American military." Stupid. Ridiculous. No, it's absurd. And all that serves to do, I think, is otherize that person, that group of people. And that policy continues. Again, we're caught because we're only taught to comply with orders and to follow the rules. Our superiors want people only to have a very narrow margin of what is acceptable, and then tenaciously root out any differences, because differences lead to disruption, and then disruption would lead to failure of a mission or a tasker, and that leads to death. The nature of terrorism, too, is probably the worst thing that could have happened, the worst possible threat we could have faced. Sorry for that delay. My computer and phone are about to die. So I'm gonna pick it up right here for all you ADHD people who want to change scenery. There you go. Last I said was that the nature of terrorism, too, is the worst possible thing we could have faced. The worst possible threat we could have faced. Guerrilla warfare has historically been successful against large, uniform invading forces. It's how America gained independence. It's how Vietnam and Korea were able to keep the US forces out of their territory. A decentralization of command centers, a fluid command structure, where each actor is like a small part of a greater whole, but also finds autonomy if they're separated, growing, fulfilling the mission, repulsing the invaders until, if, they're completely eradicated. Terrorism made it so that individuals who simply share the ideology have marching orders. 9/11 showed those sympathizers that anyone could cause harm to us in the West. They gave an ideology and parameters for furthering the cause, and made contact to become cells. They were only normal people, both at home and abroad, but they could be anywhere and anyone. So, we have billion-dollar planes with million-dollar missiles that can rain death on them from above. We wipe them out, right? Anytime there's an operation, we can watch them flee, we take them prisoner. We've got a really high success rate. They're just weak, ordinary, undisciplined civilians. Yet, they're strong, right? They're resilient. They're strong enough to cause us great harm here on the homeland. Strong enough to persevere despite all of our weapons and trainings. And this contradiction is never resolved. Often when examining past battles and wars in the Middle East, superiors will point to any of our cultural differences, or their lack of economic development, technology, their lack of infrastructure, and say that this is proof of American supremacy. Rarely will they say the implied part out loud, that these differences are the result of them being lower than us by nature, for the same reasons that superiors look down on lower ranking people. If they were better, if they were stronger, they'd be able to put up more of a fight, a fair fight, according to the rules. They wouldn't have to resort to cowardly tactics, and could instead engage us as peers. They would have the strength enough to focus on the battle and get their missions done. They'd be able to stand out on the world stage amongst the global competitors. But they don't, because they can't. And that's for a variety of reasons specific to each region, separate from some genetic or racial or cultural component. Regardless, all military members see in their enemies is a weakness, contentment for those weak people. They resent them. We resent them. And so military people only feel righteous when they're defeating them and cutting off another head from that hydra that is terrorism. Even the language we use to describe our actions against this threat serves to distance them from an inherent goodwill towards humanity. Phrases like collateral damage, friendly fire, neutralize, tactical retrograde, and any of the other phrases you hear that just gloss over the natural horrors of what they represent. Innocent civilians getting killed for no reasons. Incompetence that leads to unnecessary deaths on the battlefield when you're killing your teammates. Killing another person in general. Or retreating because too many LTs got their college education blown out the back of their head. And they don't stop there. We have innumerable terms, like this one, like these, to describe horrific scenarios in more agreeable terms. Or acronyms that we say out loud so we can ignore the meaning of some of those more disagreeable letters within the middle. This special dialect of English, it insulates us from the reality of our actions and generates at least a neutral public perception of our actions and a neutral perception of our actions that we take ourselves against the enemy. But it's not without other consequences. Use of this language also insulates us from speaking agreeable with other people outside the military. Hold on. It also insulates us from speaking with other people outside the military. If you say to someone, for instance, yeah, the mission I was working on got canned because of some excess collateral. The person doesn't know what those terms mean unless they're already familiar with the military. And so if they ask in response, like, too much collateral? What do you mean? Like, the risk wasn't worth the reward? And then you have to explain, oh no, we killed a couple women one time, and so the brass changed our ops and our tempo. And they're gonna look at you with disgust. So through use of this language, we remain, and sometimes willfully, ignorant of the reality that our actions have. We generate neutral responses from most people who don't really care about the military, small talk, stuff like that, and a negative response from people who try to make an effort to get to know us, to get to know what we do, those who try to connect to us. There's no time to think, like I said before. There's an impaired ability to think, like I said before. But now, through the use of this language, this limited dialect only further limits the tools that we have to think, to express our feelings, our emotions, our actions. We distance ourselves from emotion and critical thought. Even now, with the war on terror, we can't find peace of mind or time enough to think on our actions. Instead, what did we do? Afghanistan in August, we pulled out. Around October of 2021 is when I saw that we were finally able to get all our assets out, what we could, finalize paperwork, record everything, break for the holidays, until February 2022, when the Ukraine situation kicked off. And so instead, we just pivoted from a role of direct action to one of supporting, with just as much fervor. And that's by design, again, because the people in the military are always focused on completing the next action. If they don't, then they could not be a hero, for one, but also, up top, as you climb the ranks, you realize that you could lose your funding because you don't need it anymore. While they may not need this funding at the present moment in the current fiscal year, if you set a precedent for cutting funds, that could prevent success against the next enemy, prevent future heroes from becoming heroes. And whether that's another head from the hydra of terrorism or a greater power on the horizon, an enemy will come. So any talk of downsizing, any suggestion of pacifistic political negotiation that negates the necessity and existence of the military is off the table. It's not even considered, because all they know is completing one task after the next. So when there's no clear target, they invent one, or make a case for future preparation against, why'd I write this? Don't be a fucking nerd. A phantom menace lurking on the horizon. So they see life like they'll always be in this constant state of struggle, with regular periods of distress, regular periods of crisis. Again, because they don't heal from their trauma, and because they close their mind to the possibility of anything else happening. Anyone who would suggest a farewell to arms, suggest a downsizing of the military, thus disenfranchises military members, leading to, like a crisis of homelessness and other veteran horror stories. And this is too common, the story for ex-military people once they leave the service, because once they leave, they don't have anyone else giving them an action to accomplish. There's no one there on the outside to give them a mission, a tasker. They no longer have a clear avenue or list to take care of. There's no clear way they can become a star or a hero. There's no way for them to get respect and reverence. And after years, sometimes decades, of not using their critical thinking, distancing themselves from their emotions, that capacity becomes almost vestigial. They're not able to survive on their own. Those in powerful positions in the military want their people taken care of. Sometimes. Because after all, they are good, with a capital G, good, ontologically good men who, while not as great as themselves, are in need of leadership and deserve job security. They deserve that steady hand to guide them, to show them the better way, to show them how they too can become heroes. There, they will be able to conduct more good actions through the military. When you prevent good people from doing good deeds, and then you create policies that harm good people, you are seen as bad. You are seen as evil, doing harm against them, not passively or indirectly through a troop's incompetence or disobedience, but actively through your actions, something they have only ever experienced from the enemy. Anyone who speaks of downsizing the military, therefore, or really changing it in any way, because it would affect how they conduct missions, must, in their minds, they think they must be getting something out of it from the enemy. There must be some plot where our enemies have infiltrated or are attempting to influence us from the inside. There must be bad actors trying to receive lucre, ill-gotten gains through deals with the enemy. If not for money or political power, then for personal reasons of ideology or philosophy, lone wolf, stochastic acts. They must hold some ideological congruences with the enemy, and their influence will pollute the inherent superiority of our own military culture, and thus our country itself. They want to pull us down alongside them into mediocrity. They must be the enemy. And we see the sentiment often from individuals on the far right side of the political spectrum, where they claim that the military is going woke, and they criticize us. Like, I saw a photo of, I think it was General Milley, some general with makeup on, making fun of how we let trans people wear the uniform now. They compare recruitment ads from other countries to our own to show how we're losing our masculinity and how we should be doing things. And they really did not like that mandatory injection from 2021. Oh. These far-right ideologues, they claim all of these are the main reasons that we're having a recruitment crisis, and also claim that they hinder our performance as a functioning military by distracting from the real issues, like tasks and missions. These claims, from what I've seen, are largely dubious and unfounded, but the impact they have is real, for the reasons I stated above, how military members can come to that conclusion naturally, and how they can validate those conclusions with their status as politicians and ideologues. No, not politicians, no, ideologues, yeah. We'll say ideologues, just to stay safe. These claims are largely dubious and unfounded from what I've seen, but their impact is real. Because people with a proclivity to serve in the future, those currently serving, and veterans are more likely to believe these narratives than the average American. The right-wing bend in the military is real. Like, I don't want to go through a whole discourse, right? But I feel like we all know the military is right-wing, at least centrist, because they preserve the status quo. Yeah, I have written here. Because they want to preserve traditions. This narrative that the military is no longer promoting DEI, but it's instead forcing people to be gay or trans, or to be lab rats for some governmental experiment, makes these conservatives averse to serving. This leads to a shortage of future recruits, and it stirs performances. I said before about the injection, and that's how it stirs performances, because the people who buy into these narratives, and they don't want the injection because they're fearful, because they're believing everything that's on their Facebook feed. They have to apply for a religious exemption, and then deal with all the stress that comes from leadership because they're not following the order to get the injection. And so they have to deal with all the stress that comes with that. It leads to a shortage of new recruits because the veterans also spread this message to their younger family members and friends, telling them not to join because they don't like the way that the military is headed. And these veterans hold probably the most influence on the future state of the military, as roughly 3/4 of new recruits come from military households. I think it's more like 80% actually. This means that either a parent or a grandparent have military service in their background, and the majority of those first-generation service members are just poor people like me who are seeking social mobility. I spoke earlier on how cultural attitudes are formed prior to the military, and I think the stat proves me right, because the majority of recruits are raised by military personnel within military systems who experience aspects of service like moving every 4 years and healthcare systems and mandatory fund. They're raised to value the military, both by their parents and the environment they live in. In the cases where it's not like an active cherishment, they often simply enlist or commission for the comfort of familiarity, since they don't know how to function outside of that very unique system, this very unique system that is the military, the system they were raised in. Going to the civilian world where they would have to attend college, find a job, and settle down in one place for more than 4 years at a time. Even finding that diversity of thought, having their beliefs challenged, doesn't entice them. They enlist or they commission into the military because it's all they know. It's the easiest path for them to achieve a middle-class existence. The only thing I could compare it to is if, like, I were to move to Canada or New Zealand. The military kids, they know the system firsthand. Its familiarity appeals to them, and any changes to that familiarity, alongside the turbulence already inherent in the military life, is of course going to be resisted. This creates frustration against those advocates for change, the organizations that they may represent, and the values and objectives that they espouse. This mass of reactionaries then fall even further into conservatism. Military members do what they can to stymie the progress and to change whenever possible, wherever they can within the purview of their rank, their title, their status. And politically, from what I've seen, they oftentimes vote for those candidates who they believe will stymie the flow of this ailment, these ailments at their source. And so the military has continued to shift further right, even as society tends to progress. Somewhat leftward, I guess, but that's like not really the right term, I guess. Maybe leftwards, yeah, liberal, yeah. They feel justified in stymieing this process and saying, hold up, let's cool off for a minute and figure out what's going on before we do anything too drastic. Which is ironic, right? In an organization where haste and imperative accompany every order and action. Because for any other training, the exigency would beget a ready acceptance and a memorization of the info. It's only when it concerns their personal beliefs, right, on the validity of certain groups, or what is needed for an organization to function best, that they take issue. This is again a rejection of contemporary thought and an attempt to remain within that cult of tradition, because the military never cared about the gender or sexuality or race of those who were initially allowed to serve, because they were all just white guys. So their status, these new recruits, as racial or cultural minorities, and how that leads to a difference in treatment from others and the organization itself, is never really considered. These characteristics have barred undesirables from entry in the past. But now that the rules were changed, they expect everything to just work as normal. They don't care about the social integration of the force and eliminating stigmas associated with certain groups. They expect biased people to all of a sudden eliminate their biases and work together alongside people that they were just looking down on. And in most cases where they do work together and they do get the job done, I felt it. There's like a tension in the shop. There's no camaraderie, there's no esprit de corps, because these integrated people, these gay people, these trans people, they have to be on guard all the time, because they know that any mistake they make isn't going to be indicative of them as a person. It's not a crisis of moral character like I described earlier, but it's going to reflect ill on their entire group as a whole, sort of like how I described with terrorism. If they show up late, then it must be because they were on CPT, colored people time. If they're short with someone, then maybe it's their time of the month. If they're overly aggressive, then damn, guess the doctors left you one ball when they neutered you. It's a rejection of the ideals of contemporary thought. Surface level changes to reflect the fact that, well, now there's no policy that bars them from entry, and we're not seeing them entering, so maybe they just don't like leadership roles, right? Or maybe they have different cultural values. Or maybe they just have naturally different inclinations to be subservient instead of leading. Stuff like that. Even in cases where airmen think that they are inclusive and accepting, and say that even though they disagree with someone's way of life, that they can work together and get the job done. They again vote. They still vote for people who would harm these minorities through political action. They vote for people who would limit access to abortion, limit access to gender-affirming care, and who would vote in the affirmative for gerrymandering districts to further suppress the will of the majority, largely along racial and class lines within the cities that we're stationed in. These people, I think, like, they're the fucking worst, dude, because they're cowards. They're too afraid to say what they believe because they know that there are courses of action that minorities can take. Now, even with like dubious effectiveness, like described earlier, there's some action they can take against them. So they coach it. They coach it in language like, we can agree to disagree, or we'll have leadership say that we need to foster a culture of civility, while they put that political knife in the back of their fellow airmen. So overall, we have a rank structure that permits institutional punishment against the lower ranks. And when you've already marginalized people in those lower, and when you have already marginalized people in those lower ranks, and then you do nothing to address the social reality of these groups other than like a slideshow telling people don't use slurs, there's like a tacit endorsement of these behaviors. And I think that's a recipe for discrimination on a systemic level. And that same structure also factors into the rate of teal ribbon incidents within the military. And a problem like that, it's only getting worse. I mentioned the terms fobbit, egghead, oxygen thief, and plant eater earlier. Each of these terms are used to refer to those who, for one reason or another, don't take part in the most active or action-packed aspects of military service. These terms are not solely unique to the military, but they're used by others to belittle and condemn them who don't carry out the most lethal orders, not putting in the real work associated with the military. There is a natural tendency to value physical prowess and other signs of traditional virility due to, yeah, we have a PT test, right? And that factors into our promotions or selection for special duties. But there's also something to the violent nature of war and something just very primal with men in general. And I fell victim to this mindset, probably its most positive form. Back in basic training, when I realized I was faster than most people because I did track. And then in tech school, I did the combat ready intelligence team, and I was around other healthy people, other fit people who pushed me to do better in things like push-ups and sit-ups that I wasn't really good at, because again, I was a cross-country kid. And through these sports teams, like through these events, through these actions, I felt good. I felt like I accomplished something, something that was unique, something that all these other linguist nerds couldn't do. Every time I would go for a run, I would get a compliment on my form, or someone else asking me what sort of training I do, how I got that fast. Or there'd be a supervisor using me an example when they were yelling at some fat people on the track, saying like, look at that gazelle over there, why can't you be like him? And I knew that I could rest easy if I got a new supervisor, because they would just look at my PT score and they would see that my 1.5 mile time started with an 8, under 9 minutes, and they would praise me and they would see me as a competent person until proven otherwise, the majority of the time. I knew that I would get the respect of other branches on any like fitness thing when they saw I could do over 20 pull-ups with good form, because again, it's a joint environment, so sometimes the Marines have a pull-up bar, or there's a Spartan race on an Army obstacle course that they don't call a Spartan race, stuff like that. And it's fun to do those things, and play sports, and compete with other guys. It builds camaraderie, it builds teamwork, but like anything else, it can go too far. It has to have limits. Encouraging people to be physically fit in the military and then having it be normal for them to use that fitness to conduct violent acts, voraciously violent acts, and then making terms of spite for those who don't or can't meet the standard, to shame them. These together have impacts that affect one's self-perception, their personhood. They call into question our identity, not just as like good people, but as men. They call into question our manhood. The Air Force, and really the military as a whole, exist within and are informed by American culture. And its members often hold those same cultural values. Like I said, most of them are centrist, but there's a growing conservatism in the ranks, especially in the enlisted. Among these cultural values are roles for women and men to play in society. And there are traits that will make someone more or less successful in these roles. I think we can all agree, whether due to the patriarchy, or a set of underlying biological factors, or some divine design, that men have a set of expectations and desired traits separate from that of women. Some are good, and some are bad. I think the military has served always as a bastion of conservation of morals and culture, due to the same reverence for those who came before that I mentioned earlier, and that conservation has only been exacerbated in the last decade. The rigidity of dress and appearance standards is one part of this, and I know that there's like a psychological relation between how you look and dress yourself and how it makes you feel, but separate from just the personal appearance aspect, there are a set of actions and expectations on military men, thanks to this American culture. The military, seemingly informed by these cultural values, serves as a bastion of traditional masculinity as a result. And there have been marginal changes, but these changes were only rooted in those masculine ideals further back in the history of the West. So they're more of like a reinvention or a return to form. And again, they only occurred in response to attempted societal progress in the past 6 years, 7 years. Like, when we think of what makes a man in America, I think we all agree on some stereotypical things, like taking risks, being physically strong, being aggressive, having bravado, being straight, you don't want to be gay, emotional repression, and like having sex, like having lots of sex, wanting to have lots of sex. Coming from Virginia, a small town and pretty conservative Virginia, I saw these expectations, these stereotypes of what it means to be a man firsthand. I've seen the shift in the rhetoric governing these expectations from the more progressive pockets of the media, and how that drove a resultant reaction of the more conservative pockets to reaffirm masculinity, again, using that deeply rooted traditions in the past of the West, and things like Greek, Roman philosophy. These renewed ideas of what it means to be a man include like high achievement in society or your occupation, leading a family, providing for that family, having a sense of pride and honor with your place in society, and instead of emotional repression, an emphasis on rational thought. And these seem to be rooted again in that Greek and Roman ideology and teachings, with a little bit of Christian teachings, Judeo-Christian values and teachings. You can think of like, I don't know if you're on this side of TikTok, but there are all these like gym influencers with tattoos about like Icarus falling, hitting poses from Renaissance paintings whenever they're showing off their body. Or they'll have like voiceovers with the quotes from Plato or Aristotle. So we see that in society at large in America, in response to a pressure that was intended to break down these roles, they became more rigid by depending on, pressing into their foundations. And I think that same concept, that same act, is happening in the military to an even more severe degree. I think the military as, again, a bastion of traditional masculinity, is one of the few avenues where men can express their physical prowess and aggressiveness, and keep emotions in check while operating under pressure. Again, due to the nature of some jobs in the service, this may never change. So the military is a sort of cultural bastion to those who have these traits or aspire to possess them. If you want to be a real man, or if you think you have what it takes, the military serves as a challenge of your masculine identity, of your masculine ideals. If you succeed in training, if you rise through the ranks, and you win on the battlefield, then you're a hero in our military, but also a man in society. Not only did you succeed in displaying these masculine traits within like a normal society among lay people, but you displayed them better, executed them better than a cohort of the most manly men from your society, from your country, and against the most manly men from other societies. And I'm doing my best to build a strong basis for these claims, but for whatever reasons, if I say that the military is inherently masculine, or even just traditionally masculine, and it's changing, it feels right, doesn't it? Again, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not going to try and deep dive and prove this thesis statement a whole lot more, but I think there's a great overlap. In summary, I think there's a great overlap between the masculine traits in our society and those required by the military. So to me, the military is masculine. And that's good in some ways and bad in other ways when it goes too far. A little aside right now. The military branches each have a set of values, and these martial values are intended to inform the moral character of those serving, to make them fit within the ranks, right? In the Air Force, ours are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. The basic concepts and premises across the branches follow roughly the same lines. Because, again, the military places artificial pressure on us to perform in every aspect, theoretically, so that we're ready when the real pressures arise. These foundational values, our core values, they're used as a reference for superiors, so they can say that we have failures not of executing an order, not of acting, but our failures of moral character. If you didn't stay a couple hours each day, you're not putting the service before yourself. If you didn't remember to do one of your additional duties or your trainings, then you must not have the integrity to be honest enough with yourself and only take on what you can excel in. And now, because of that lack of integrity, other people have to pick up the pieces of your mess. If you make a mistake, well, you're not excelling in everything you do. We don't make mistakes. We can't afford to. All of this ties back to what I said earlier. If you mess up, you're a bad person. You've made a mistake, or not someone who's made a mistake, but someone who can only cause harm unless they change their whole personhood. Someone who continue to make mistakes, unless they change. The critique is leveled at you, the individual, your character, and not your actions. It's tied to the military's overlap with manliness, and so if you fail as an airman, you fail as a man. No one wants to fail as a man because that would lead to despair. Because of that, by remaining hyper-vigilant to military standards, service members in turn become hyper-expressive in their masculinity. They become hyper-masculine. And such a man, and much like a man on steroids, there is a cost that they have to pay. Using the values from before, we see that aspiring to these standards leads to harm for the airmen and their family. Being strong and aggressive and taking risks can only be done if you have a working body in good shape. This is quantified, measured, using the PT test and height and weight requirements and our waist tape. What was once subjective and could be measured by if you were fast, good at cardio, a power lifter, good at a sport, is now made uniform and standardized. If you fail this test or barely pass, you'll be stigmatized. If you're a woman or you're older and your standards are lower, then you're not really, like, you're gonna be otherized because you're not really putting in the good work. You're doing girl push-ups, you're doing girl sit-ups. And me, as someone who's very physically fit, I think the standards are unnecessary for most jobs, but they're still present. In an effort to meet these standards, military members will often do crash diets, supplement experimentation, overuse their muscles. Passing the PT test and maintaining a healthy BMI is something that I think most people can do with relative ease. If they just realize they don't need to do too much. All they need to do, right? Moderate workouts, 30, 45 minutes a day, following a plant-based diet whenever possible. I call myself a dirty vegan because my meal prep is vegan, but if I'm out with friends, I'm not a vegan. If there's a party in the office and someone brings in cake, I'm not a vegan because it lets me have fun and not be a stick in the mud. It's easy. It's really easy. Because I know, right? I know that I'm fit, and I know that one meal when I'm out with friends won't kill me. And eventually, I'll have enough good meals to make up for it, and I'll still be able to score over a 90 on my PT test. But because the emphasis placed on it, this test, by our leadership, is so intense, and again, I think this is rooted in that hypermasculinity, the testers psych themselves out, and they often repress the knowledge of what they have to do because it seems too daunting, or they become one of those really cringy Joe Rogan keto CrossFit powerlifter types with like the big gallon water bottle, and you'll know them if they don't have that bottle because fitness is all they talk about, keto is all they talk about. They'll talk about how they don't eat birthday cake, and they'll brag about weighing every piece of food before it goes into their mouth. And they'll be proud of it, but they don't realize that they have a improper eating habit. And so do the binge fitness people. But this obsession with meeting masculine standards goes beyond the diet. You need a healthy body to perform your daily tasks and missions, to do your job. If you have something that may require a medical appointment, then you're going to be hard-pressed to find time or feel able to take time off for that appointment. There seems to never be anyone who can fill your spot. You're always going to be mission essential and seemingly irreplaceable. And so you put off your medical appointments unless they pose a threat to your life, your limbs, or your eyesight. So hypothetically, right, let's say that you've got a knee that's giving you trouble. You mitigate with rice and ibuprofen for a month because you have a job to get done. You don't want to be called a malingerer. So you also don't want to be made fun of by a superior. You don't want them to say, "Oh, does Timmy have a toothache? Oh, get back to work." You don't want that to happen. You don't want to be made out to be that way. Because if that happens, people may look down on you. And you may not be a star by taking time off mission, by not accomplishing these missions. Until eventually the day comes that after a month, again, you're not getting better. And so you make a doctor's appointment. Or you would, if the number on the recall roster wasn't correct. And so you go to their site. And that number is also not ringing. And so you go to the ER and you get checked out there, where a doctor doesn't really believe you, doesn't really believe that you're hurt because of, and this is a problem in the military. I don't know what I could do to fix it, what there could be, but there's just a lot of people who try to get out of PT, a lot of people who malinger, and you're believed to be a malingerer by the doctors until proven otherwise because they're just jaded as hell. The doctor doesn't believe you're hurt because of all the other people who go in there just to get out of PT. So it gives you a bottle of ibuprofen and says, make an appointment in a week if you're still hurt. And so you wait a week and the pain is still there. And so you call, this time, the correct number for the clinic, only to find the nearest appointment is 3 weeks from that day. So you have to deal with the pain, mitigate it with rice, until that day rolls around. You arrive 15 minutes early for your appointments, only to wait 45 minutes before they call you back. The nurse checks you in, you wait another half hour until the PA comes in, and then you explain the situation. They do some testing, and they tell you, okay, let's put you on some ibuprofen, and then you can come back in a week if that pain keeps up. You explain to the PA that you've had this ailment for 2 months now, and really want an MRI, because you've been doing some YouTube research and think it might be a torn meniscus. And then they explain to you that you need to follow this procedure because they can't be wasting resources on anyone who wants an MRI for any reason. So you wait another week, this time calling for a follow-up that same day that you had this one, because you know it's going to be a long wait time. And luckily, they get you in after that week. You get an MRI on that day, and they tell you in the summary, oh, looks like you tore your meniscus. Yeah, maybe if we had caught it earlier on, we could have done a surgery, right? But right now, it looks like it's healed too much for us to go in without risking something. So right now, yeah, it felt too much for us to do anything about it. Do you still have pain? Oh, you do? Yeah, it may just be something that gives you trouble from now on. So from now on, just try not to overdo it and stick to low impact movements and make sure you claim this on your VA disability. Imagine that. Imagine that hypothetical scenario, just completely hypothetical. There is here, in this system, a tacit assertion that you should not be weak. This is true for physical health, as I explained above, but also for mental health. Across the military, we have rate, nearly twice as high as civilians. And this is again because a real man wouldn't need help. And if you feel guilty for taking time for yourself instead of focusing on the mission, and when you do seek help, there's a long wait time. And they doubt if you really have any issues at all, or if you're just trying to get out of work. And then the care you receive is subpar, and there's little progress made because for the psychologists and the PA, any medical person, the turnover rate is very high. If they're not turning over, you're turning over. Until very recently, they didn't address any stigma associated with mental health, like the organization, the Air Force organization. They did nothing to disprove rumors that were widespread, rumors that stated that if you sought help, you'd be discharged, you'd lose your clearance, you'd be forced to retrain, until like the last few years. Personally, I only saw it late into 2019, right before the holidays, because my group saw 2 suicides in the 3rd quarter of that year. So we have a system that discourages seeking care because they think you shouldn't need it, and that will only take time away from the mission. Because if you did have a problem, a real man would be strong enough to handle it on his own, and if not, then they'd be rational enough to find a new way to deal with it. And they'd be smart enough, rational enough, to find a way through any seemingly insurmountable crisis. When they do encourage you to use care, which is a very recent phenomenon, it's often not available as advertised, either because of long wait times or faulty information. And when you are finally seen, the quality of care is lackluster because they don't have the resources to provide for you. And the PCMs doubt the ailments of airmen, putting us away for weeks at a time with just ibuprofen and Motrin. And there's a lack of continuity of care that stalls true treatment for the psychology realm and to the physical realm sometimes, because the PCM or the airmen are moving at least every 2 years. It's like a failed system through and through on the inside. And everything that I've heard about the VA makes me think that if in that hypothetical scenario I were to file a disability claim, it would just be more of the same, and I'd be way better off going civilian, getting a private insurer. I spoke earlier about how the military is moving farther right as a bad thing, and I think that is a bad thing, but I want to make sure that I make it clear that conservatism isn't inherently bad. I only find it objectionable when it unnecessarily obstructs progress for the sake of appealing to a powerful minority at the cost of bettering the most people, or in the cases where the more radical members seek to regress progress. I believe the military is one such area whereby, through appealing to pathos, the feelings, the fears, that this catabolic form of conservatism takes root. Because the majority of Americans are apolitical, like they don't vote. And the majority of those who do vote lean left. These military professionals are finding it continually harder to locate like-minded people outside the military. The country progresses further left every year, on average. The conservatives lose more and more votes on average, and so they must resort to continually more extreme actions to maintain their power. As the economy changes with regular periods of instability, every 10 years or so there's a financial crash, and people fall in hard times, and they stay in the military, join the military, as our military pay doesn't keep up with inflation, as our barracks crumble, people in the military become more and more frustrated. They feel humiliated because they're losing their political power, their economic power, and now with the social left, the progressive social movements from the left, they're losing their social standing, as those people from the fringes of society are included more and more alongside them. And society continually has more negative opinions on conservative beliefs or the actions of the US military abroad. Their feelings of superiority are invalidated, and they become a further insulated community. All they've worked to achieve is being invalidated at best, in the case of Afghanistan, and done away with at worst. In this state of mind, there are only so many options available to remedy the situation. What is a body of warfare professionals to do when they're disenfranchised from all they've devoted their lives to, and their only advocates continually shift the Overton window further right? What do they do when a group of people trained to be hypervigilant and ready for crisis, to expect crisis as a natural state of being? Yeah, it seems like the world's going crazy, right? The world's in a crisis, and they're willed to act, they're taught to act. Yeah. A little aside here that I want to make a note on because I find it a bit concerning. One second. So I had the opportunity to attend a conference of Army chaplains back in April this year. They called it the Chaplain Annual Sustainment Training, and it was hosted by chaplains and attended by senior leaders with their own assumably strong personal religious beliefs. In this training event, in this course, there were several things that I think are cause for concern. They, the chaplains and speakers, recognized that there is a loss of faith in institutions and in religion in recent years. And with that also comes a loss of purpose. In this, what I've done research on, what's called right now our post-truth or our post-ironic society, they aim to use religion as a framework, even spirituality as a framework, to give soldiers a metaphysical purpose for the actions they take in the military. The first speaker was Lisa Miller, PhD. In her speech and book, The Awakened Brain, she examines how there's a response in our brain, a certain area of our brain, that only lights up in response to religion or faith or spirituality, whatever you want to call that unsubstantiated belief, in the right hemisphere of the brain. She then uses this fact, by showing a picture of a brain with some parts colored more red than the others, to encourage these senior leaders, like flag officers, to use language and lessons congruent with religious teachings while they instill Army values. She states that this will lay the groundwork for them to find faith on their own in the future, and thus give a purpose to what she called the most at-risk demographic, the young men who are 18 to 25 years old, which, if you know anything about recruitment, is also the ideal age range, 18 to 24, for military enlistees. This is, of course, for the benefit of the Army, and she stated that spiritual soldiers are more likely to, quote, give their all on the battlefield. The second speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Eric Leach, was just your standard military boomer. He had us watch a video with clips from people like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, others, just to say that there is currently in our country an epidemic of loneliness. And then he showed how the rate of teen suicide and loneliness have been on the rise ever since the significant spike in the year 2007. And he did the meme, he did the boomer meme. He said, this was also the same year that the iPhone was made. Coincidence? Like, yeah, dude. Yeah, no, I'm sure it was the iPhone that made people lonely. I'm sure that the mortgage crisis that tore families apart, left people with no job market to go into, left people who were young enough, not teenagers, but young enough to remember and live through their parents getting divorced and the financial hardship therein, to recognize that they needed financial security, and so they devoted their time to education and anything that would give them financial security instead of fun things, instead of finding out what they really want and focusing only on the money. And because of that, like I said before, you don't use it, you'll lose it. That social capacity became vestigial, but that need is still there. And so they feel lonely, but they don't know how to form social cohesion. And even if they did, oftentimes when they take the time to try and form these bonds, they're not making money. And the economy's only gotten more severe since 2007, meaning we don't have enough time to go outside. We don't have enough money to go outside and go anywhere with friends. And if we did have time and money to go outside, where would we go? Where are we gonna go to? They say go outside, and we go outside, and it's all just fucking parking lots now. You need a souped up Hemi SUV Super Titan F-150 just to feel safe going down the road, because if you're driving a Corolla and you get into an accident, that bumper is gonna go straight through your windshield, or that Hummer bumper is gonna go through your windshield. Yeah, I think there's other factors other than just like, I can call my friends now. I think there's other factors than that contribute to suicide and loneliness in the teen population. Where was I? The last speaker of note was a Dr. Belinda Powell. She gave what was basically a boilerplate speech on the importance of framing the words we use to describe the Army community. Given that many poor people come from broken homes, seeking a community, a purpose, a brotherhood, she states that if there is a spiritual purpose to them serving the Army, then they will be able to bear any of the hardships the Army as an organization can throw at them. And they will want to bear these hardships so they can serve that higher spiritual purpose. Overall, it was an all-day event, like 8 hours, 9 hours with lunch, of people stating in very many words that quote about he who has a why can bear almost any how. And they, as the chaplain corps, aim to provide that why. This is a cause of concern for me, and is another factor that turns me away from the military, because what I found out later through research, a couple stats on the military chaplains, over 90% of the chaplains in the military are some form of Christian, Protestant, or Catholic. And that sounds like, right? Yeah, we're in America, largely Christian nation, at least culturally, societally. Okay, that sort of makes sense. 70% of all the chaplains in the military are evangelicals. This is very disproportionate to the representation within the general populace. And after I learned more about what makes someone evangelical, it led me to a pretty scary realization, because evangelicals are defined by their calling to evangelize, meaning to preach and spread the gospel to as many people they can, in as many ways as they can, to save as many souls, convert them into their religion as they can. The chaplain corps basically gives these people the opportunity to spread a spiritual message while they make a very comfortable living as chaplains, that six-figure officer salary, also with passable health benefits. So they're going to live a long time, and the longer you live, the more time you have, the more chances there are for things to happen, like converting people. And now, with there being a crisis of purpose in the nation and the army in general, they're holding conferences like these to plan out the best way to lay the groundwork for their religion to thrive, using the teachings and the wordings and metaphors from their religion without citing the source. These chaplains, they lay the groundwork for their religion to spread. It plants the seed of spirituality, of faith, of their religion into the minds of military recruits, again, within that younger 18 to 25-year-old age bracket, who they know are probably going to take comfort in the chaplain's messages when they're using their services and they strike up a conversation at the coffee pot, when they seek counsel from the chaplain in times of crisis, even though they're not religious. Their motto is, for God and country, meaning they put God first and country second. Their primary objective is serving their God, and the vast majority seek to do that by converting others as evangelicals. In the chaplain corps, they have access to a group of young adults who are largely without purpose and in need of support. A vulnerable populace will find spirituality in the help they seek from the chaplains, never knowing that the chaplains seek to steer them into their religion. Everything I've seen at this conference and in hindsight on past events seemed to validate my fears that in addition to the hypermasculinity, in addition to this cult of action or rejection of modernism, this machismo attitude, everything that I mentioned before, the dehumanization of foreign enemies, an occupation where we're taught to act immediately on orders from those superior to us, and really who's more superior than the Almighty. It worries me a lot how these trends, and the political stuff, and the political polarization, all these factors coalescing together into a group of people who are trained killers, it's really concerning to me. At the top of the ranks, the bottom of the ranks, within this organization, as we get more and more religious, who's gonna want to be in a type of organization like that? What type of people obsessed with sexual conservatism, obsessed with machismo, obsessed with spirituality? What type of people are gonna be attracted by that? What type of people are gonna be attracted by preserving the cultural traditions of America, even when they're rooted in racist ideals? What type of people are going to want to serve? Returning to the main points though, the military recruits and advertises and makes use of masculine men, but only in approved circumstances, right? After the mission is complete, mission accomplished, and they're expected to just heal, obey orders, like they're some obedient dog. They're expected to recognize context and then control those same urges that they were selected for, to control the same skills they were forced to develop. But when you give no context for orders other than why they're just, and you have a structure that allows for high-ranking people to make ever broader orders using that authority, and these people underneath them, as well as themselves, their service becomes their life because of the oneness of the military's expectations of men and society's expectations of men. And even in that religious component, expectations of men. That, coupled with the amount of time they have to invest into the military instead of personal pursuits, military members begin to view everyone, every circumstance, as this structure of hierarchies, this structure of like, who's on top of who's in charge here. So they let their position or their aspirations for such rush to their head. Critical thought isn't applied. All they know is recognizing certain traits, recognizing power, habit. Am I in charge? Who's in charge of me? Who am I in charge of? Okay, execute according to these given roles, these standardized roles, whatever the authority tells me to execute. They let this aspiration or their current position rush to their head. And so their friends, their families, their intimate partners, and their children become just another person, another object within that hierarchy, another point to control, another person to compete with, another body to place within these rigid boxes of woman, wife, son, daughter. And then they reinforce the standards inherent to success within these roles, with the same methods of enforcement often reserved for fellow airmen. This hostility and control extends to matters of sex and gender. They become obsessed with making sure that their wife is loyal and constantly supplying sex to affirm his masculinity. Because after all, a man's virility, the potency of the seed, that's another area where men are judged. To ensure that their sons and daughters are tough and subservient respectively, and always straight, all the time straight. That's what society says. Don't want to be gay, can't be gay. When sons or daughters cannot meet these standards, reprimand is doled out without restraint, because in their household, they, as the man, are the supreme authority. They are the star of that organization. They sacrificed so much to provide for their family, and all they ask is for their family to be accountable and honest, like him. The military man, he suffers from the pressure of leading the family, choosing where they're going to uproot themselves to every 4 years. And all the family members have to do is sit up straight in the saddle while they take that free ride that he offers them. He is the trusty mule who will deliver them to a more prosperous future. Is it really so bad to want your son or your daughter to just behave? Just to act right? Don't they know what he sacrifices every day? It's not easy being a man, but someone has got to do it. And anyone who deviates from these expectations, anyone who doesn't perform as a good son, a good man, a woman, a good wife, is in need of severe correction. There are some who learn to succeed within these households, and so willingly and readily and happily enlist into the service when they're ready, or fill out their duties as dutiful housewives, subservient to their men, always supporting wherever he leads them. But most people are naturally averse to excessive control. And so, in the military family, the military man, will find that divorces are frequent. Children, once they leave for the military or college, will estrange themselves and never use any leave to come and visit them. To compensate for this impotence, this lack of familial values, this lack of the sign of manhood where you have your seed propagate forth from you into like a communal sense, right? Like having a son, having a family, having a wife that loves you. Because you can't do this, because you see them as another thing to control, they try to compensate for it. They compensate for their importance. They take action against those people who they've always really had a social authority over, through and through. The second sex, the weaker sex. The sex that Catherine McKinnon defined best, I think, as she stated that they are of a social standing that makes them violatable. I'll say violatable. You can look up Catherine McKinnon, woman quote, but it's women. Teal ribbon incidents against lower-ranking people, especially women, remains a large issue. If you don't know what teal ribbon is, look up what month is April, what campaigns are in April, what month is April? April Awareness Month, yeah. This is because the military, in being inherently masculine, despises those traits viewed as traditionally feminine. There is a disdain for women and all traits therein, in their status as the antipode, the opposite of masculinity, which itself is order and strength. Women are simplistically categorized as chaotic and weak. The social implication of this, while leading to teal ribbon incidents, like I said before, also leads to a disdain for men and sons who display feminine traits. Homosexuality, not wanting to be dirty, not having a large sexual appetite, all of this and more is looked down on. And while this is again something to do with larger society, I think that because these values go alongside other masculine traits, they are also indirectly exacerbated by the military structure and culture. But even then, attitudes around being gay and what it means to be a man are changing. So military men are finding less and less people who agree with these values, at least to the same extent, outside the military. So they have another avenue for differing opinion and the critical reflection, critical thought that could bring closed off to them. And they devote more and more time to their tasks, to their purpose for being in the military, to what eventually becomes their only purpose for being at all. In summary, the military is a very uncomfy organization, and it doesn't seem apt to change within my lifetime. If not because of the inherent rigidity of government systems, or the inherent nature of how violent war is. I know, like, war is hell, yeah, no, I heard, I read All Quiet, I know. And then because of the culture and the people within it not willing change fast enough, or at the appropriate levels to really make an impact for the better. Before I go though, I mentioned the book Starship Troopers earlier, and how it and other fictional novels are... No, I mentioned the book Starship Troopers earlier. It and other fictional novels are more often than not just vessels for the political ideologies of their authors. I'm choosing to highlight Starship Troopers here because it's the most egregious example of this on any reading list that I found, and it's on a lot of reading lists, because the book, beyond the surface of the characters and the plot, is a political thesis. It's like Atlas Shrugged, or I've heard Catch-22 is sort of like this. I can't speak on that. I've never read it. I have read Atlas Shrugged, and I have read Starship Troopers and seen the movie, so I feel like I can speak about this. The messages of the novel, like what Heinlein wanted to preach, they're conveyed directly through the characters in the novel. Not just any characters, though. The characters in the novel that beget the most respect from our main cast, and who are ultimately proven right throughout the events of the novel. When you have a novel like this, where the message is a very straightforward endorsement of a totalitarian government, where conscription is mandatory for attaining lots of human rights, like having children, and the only way they found to ensure that there are enough jobs to sustain such a large body of government is through constant expansion and warfare, and that eventually pushed them out from the earth and towards warfare against other alien life. That seems like further proof of that toxic culture in the military that I've highlighted throughout this video. Because again, every other book on these reading lists is meant to be taken at face value, where the heroes of history are regaled for their actions, and we highlight and we justify their actions. These pop psychology authors generate ways in which you, as a leader, can start with why and just make up a purpose that sounds good even though you haven't really been given one. Or the authors that recognize that eventually within this system, we're gonna become fed up with it. Most people are not gonna like this system, and so they try to preemptively sow the seed of individual responsibility in your mind with books like The Art of Happiness, where they say that being happy is a choice, and the grass is greener where you water it, when there's a field of wildflowers right on the other side. So we come to think that we're wrong. No, this is about, I went off the cuff, off script. And through all these books, right, we see that readers are not meant to look below the surface, but to willingly accept the morals and messages of the author. You can't expect those who, either by nature or culture or learned habits from military service, you can't expect them to look beyond the surface of anything that's given to read, because it's not their practice. Anything else they're mandated or regulated to be is as straightforward and simplified as possible. And the only argument given, if any, is in favor of their decision to make this order. The discourse and values considered are not mentioned. Refutations to common arguments are not mentioned. And so in the case where service members disagree with an order, but they begrudgingly follow, they simply just control their emotion, think rationally, and then just shoot the shit with their peers after work. The book, in this case, Starship Troopers, takes place in a society where an orderly, totalitarian military state is argued for again and again in the place of a modern, chaotic society. In the book, they talk about how back in the 1960s, gangs of juvenile delinquents were roaming because parents didn't want to discipline their children. And that all came about because they started to listen to those eggheads in academia. I'm not doing this justice. I'll link to a better video explanation in the description. But overall, I think the military is very, very bad. Won't get better. There's a whole world out there for me to explore, and parts of my personality now that I've had to rediscover since I'm not beholden to the military anymore. I'm happy, I'm optimistic about my future for the first time in 4 years. I know it doesn't seem like that, but it's midnight now. I've been up for almost like 16 hours. I intend to make the most of my time that I spent in the military, the most of my time in indentured servitude to the government. Thank you for watching, if indeed you still are. I might make a follow-up on this video 1 or 2 years from now if I find out that I was wrong about everything or things were blown up out of proportion, but we'll see. Throughout the course of this video, there were a couple of places where I was like, wait, did I talk about that? Did that make sense? Am I using synonyms that sound too different colloquially? But it's been like the past 2 months that I've been working on this thing off and on. So it's just good to get it out there in a somewhat orderly fashion. Again, mostly for me, but also for the people who are wanting to enlist, so they know what they're getting into. And maybe, hopefully, if one of those stars of the organization see this, we might be able to get some change on some level in some branch. Yeah. Yeah.